Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2022 Asia Farm Animal Day. Thank you, Asia for Animals Coalition, for this opportunity. Our session today is a collaboration between World Animal Protection, International Accountability Project, and Sinergia Animal. We will be discussing sustainable finance and animal welfare, tools, trends, and insights. My name is Angel Flores, International External Affairs Manager at World Animal Protection, and I will be your moderator for this session today. So allow me to briefly introduce our organization. World Animal Protection is a global animal welfare organization, and we have been campaigning for over 50 years to end animal cruelty and suffering. Our work is focused on two primary goals: transforming the global food system and stopping the exploitation of wild animals. In today's session, we will be talking about the role that money plays in fueling factory farming, which we know poses a great threat to animals, people, and the planet. Behind the growth of factory farming around the world are private financial institutions and development banks that continue to bankroll this destructive industry. So together with our expert panelists, we will look at this more closely and seek to open a conversation on the role of fair finance in building a world where respect for animals and nature sits at the heart of our food system. Our first speaker is Jennifer Black. She is the head of campaign at World Animal Protection and responsible for our Global Fair Finance campaign, raising citizens' awareness of the impact of their investments and working with financial institutions and governments to support a transition towards a humane and sustainable food system. Welcome, Jenny. Thanks for joining us today. Our second speaker is Vaishnavi Varadarajan, the South Asia Community Organizer at International Accountability Project. She coordinates IAP's programmatic work in South Asia, including the early warning system to exchange information of development finance investment with communities and CSOs. And this is to inform the community's response to different development projects and reinforce community-led development. Welcome, Vaishnavi. Our third speaker is Wichpayat Piramsan, Public Affairs Director in Southeast Asia for Sinergia Animal. She is based in Bangkok, and she is working with a team in both Thailand and Indonesia to secure cage-free commitments from major companies in those countries, as well as working with other NGOs and key stakeholders in Southeast Asia to boost the movement regionally. So again, welcome to our three speakers, welcome to our participants, and we're very excited to have this discussion and this opportunity to share our thoughts with you today. So to start us off, I'd like to hand over the floor to Jenny. Jenny, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction, Angel. And hi, everyone. And thank you so much for taking the time to attend the session today. The other speakers as well. I should just now be sharing my screen. I hope that that's working okay. Yeah, so Angel's already given a great introduction to who World Animal Protection are, and yes, I'm the head of our Fairer Finance campaigns, and today I'll be talking really about the money flowing from multilateral development banks and into intensive livestock farming around the world. And you know, we know the many issues that intensive livestock farming is causing across, environmental problems, animal welfare problems, social problems. But despite that, multilateral development banks have continued to bankroll the expansion of the industry. So today, I'm just going to give a little bit of an introduction into why we consider it worthwhile to actually work on the development banks, hopefully demystify the development banks a little bit, because they're a new target for almost all organizations working in our space, and hopefully maybe get some of you interested in joining the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail later on. But before we get into the main presentation, I thought that it would be really interesting to also just ask you a little bit about how much you know about development banks and how much public awareness there is in your country about development banks, because obviously that can vary quite a lot, and it's just kind of nice to know a little bit who we're talking to. So if it's possible to launch the poll, maybe we can launch the poll now. Perfect. And I'll just give you 30 seconds or so to vote in the poll. Cool. Thank you very much for that. And yes, as I kind of thought, there is quite low awareness about development banks, and that makes perfect sense because they're kind of not the first institution that you would normally, learn about or think about in your daily life. And that was the same for us as World Animal Protection, and probably for other organizations here as well. So now that we've had a little bit of an introduction and have got to know a bit more about you, I'll kind of start getting into how the development banks are funding the expansion of factory farming. So just to be clear, development banks are owned by governments, and multilateral development banks are banks like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank or the IFC, and they're owned by groups of several governments, and they're supposed to support economic growth, and many of them have commitments to support sustainability and sustainable growth as well. But unfortunately, words on paper don't always translate into action, and too often they've continued to fund harmful industries, not just in the food system, but also in energy and extractive industries and lots of other projects. And this often happens regardless of local community concerns or opinions, or actually a kind of thorough analysis of how the projects might contribute to broader issues like climate change or biodiversity loss. And in the food system, very often the development banks fall into the false narrative of viewing factory farming as the system that works and the system that has, a track record of producing more food. And since, we need food to feed the world, what's the problem is quite often their opinion. Now, we know that development banks have sort of plowed at least $4 billion into factory farming in the last 10 years. And that's a very, very low estimate. So it's at least that, but it's likely much higher. And it is a lot of money, but it's not that much money compared to some private banks and other financial institutions that are sort of shareholders in key companies and things. So why has World Animal Protection chosen to still focus on development banks as well as private financial institutions? There are kind of two main reasons. The first reason is development banks are owned by governments, and that means that the money, that they're using is actually kind of public money, and they're using this public money to fund the expansion of factory farming. We think that because they use public money, they should actually be held to a higher standard. And they should not be investing in systems that have such catastrophic impacts on human health, on the environment, and on animals. And this is especially the case because as we, the taxpayer, often end up inadvertently having to sort of pay twice for these projects. The first time to fund them, and the second time to clean up the negative impacts that the projects are having. And the second problem is that development banks are investing huge amounts of money in expanding industrial livestock in countries or regions where it might not already be the dominant form of food production. And that means that at the very time we need to be supporting resilient, sustainable local food systems, they're pushing a globally uniform industrial model all around the world. So instead of investing in the long-term sustainable solutions that we need, they're actually just propping up the broken system that is already, proven to cause such harmful impacts. And just as a sort of final point on this, in terms of the unique role of development banks, because their shareholders are governments, they can actually take a longer term view than a lot of other private financial institutions. And that's because they're under less pressure to make a profit for the shareholders this quarter or this year or something. So it should enable them to sort of do longer term planning and invest in really amazing projects that scale up sustainable and humane systems that we know we're going to need in the future. So it's kind of especially disappointing that the institutions who are supposed to be able to take a sort of long-term view are failing to do so, and they're just still seeing factory farming as a system that works and really still thinking too often in a short-term way. So we were very intrigued to find out more about what the development banks exactly were doing, because we've only been working on development banks for like 2 years. So earlier this year, World Animal Protection launched a report actually looking in more detail at what the banks are saying versus what they're actually doing. So we looked at 12 of the largest multilateral development banks around the world, and we found that almost without exception, they're saying the right things when it comes to food systems sustainability. And in fact, every single bank that had a public statement related to livestock production indicated a support for sustainable farming. But there's a huge problem in what they consider to be sustainable. 50% of the development banks that we looked at approved a new factory farming project last year, and we know that factory farming is an inherently unsustainable way of producing food. So in this way, they're following the same patterns of greenwashing by making small changes to an existing model and calling it sustainable, rather than looking at different, truly sustainable food systems. The second thing that kind of jumped out to us in the report was that despite their really powerful position, the banks are failing to promote and require best practice when it comes to animal welfare. Only 2 of the banks, the European Investment Bank and the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, require all the projects that they fund to have higher welfare than the local and national legal minimums. So that means that the other banks are not even explicitly ruling out funding the cruelest forms of factory farming, including with cages and mutilations, So it's not just that they're still investing in factory farming, they're actually not even explicitly ruling out the worst forms of factory farming either. Now, we know that a target as powerful and large as some of the biggest development banks will take a lot of time and effort to change. So how are we actually hoping to get the MDBs to stop investing in factory farming. We are part of the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign. Actually, so the other two speakers are also a part of this campaign, which is really great. You can see the logos of the other founding members on the steering committee, but we have a much broader membership base now of members from all around the world. And the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign brings together civil society organizations from across a wide range of interests. Some focus on animal welfare, others on the environment or transparency or human rights, lots of different interest areas. But what brings us together is that we all agree that to enjoy a just and equitable and sustainable future, MDBs need to stop financing factory farming. So by coming together, we hope to make a kind of unified and holistic push rather than just focusing on our own area of expertise. And by joining up, hopefully we're more powerful than the sum of our parts. And Vaishnavi will go into more detail about the early warning system, which is an amazing tool that we used to identify potentially interesting projects that the development banks are funding. But in terms of how the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign kind of operates and what we focus on, we work sometimes on a project by project basis. So when a development bank proposes a new factory farming project, we establish whether there's local opposition to it and take a look at what the impacts might be, on animals or the environment or society. And for projects that have not already passed, we will lobby the government and the executive directors of that bank to try and block the project from being approved. If the project has already passed, and sadly there are a lot of projects that have already passed, we try to document the failures of the development banks to follow their own policies and procedures and document the harmful impacts caused by specific projects, hoping that then this builds up, an evidence base that shows why the MDBs shouldn't be investing in these systems. As well as working on a project by project basis, we also do broader advocacy, awareness raising and campaigns, hoping to push the MDBs to stop financing factory farming altogether. So we also look at broader issues on the global agenda, which we think are relevant, like showing the banks that investing in factory farming goes against their goals on climate change and biodiversity. And we hope that by combining this specific project by project approach with some of the broader issues on the global agenda, and through a mixture of advocacy and public campaigns, we'll be able to build a strong groundswell of support for the MDBs to stop financing factory farming. So to close, I'd just really like to extend an invitation to each of you to join the campaign if this is something that you're interested in. The campaign has calls once per month for all members, but there are working groups focusing on different parts of the campaign. So if you're more interested in the policy and advocacy side, or you're more interested in communications or actually monitoring projects on the ground and monitoring the impacts of them, we're super flexible in terms of the amount of time and resources that you can put in. And of course, kind of crucially, we mobilize as a group once harmful projects are proposed and before they're voted on. And it really helps to have a large group of civil society organizations pushing back together against that project. So please get in touch with me if you're interested in joining or if you just want some more information, and I'd be super happy to talk to you. And I look forward to your questions and no doubt we'll have some questions for the other panelists as well. I'll hand back over to Angel now. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Jenny. And yeah, to our attendees today, you can place your questions in the chat box and through the Q&A button as well. Looking forward to addressing those at the Q&A later on. Without further ado, I'd like to call on Vaishnavi to further discuss the early warning system, which Jenny has mentioned earlier, but this presentation will detail it further. Over to you, Vaishnavi.
Thank you, Angel. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Vaishnavi Vardarajan from International Accountability Project. And today I'll be talking about a tool called the Early Warning System and how getting accessible, timely information on projects proposed by development finance institutions has played a role in the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign. I just also want to state that I will be speaking on behalf of my colleagues in Brazil, Alex and Gustavo, who have been leading this work on behalf of our organization. Just a minute. Yeah. Before we start, just a quick introduction on IAP. IAP, or International Accountability Project, is an international human rights and environment rights organization that works in solidarity with communities, civil society, and social movements to change how today's development is done. We do that by informing and amplifying campaigns, broadening access to information, and creating spaces within and outside dominant power systems for communities to lead the development decisions that affect them. So a big part of our work is ensuring that communities have access to information about projects that impact them. And that work is largely supported by the Early Warning System. What is Early Warning System? Early Warning System is the first civil society-led database to organize, summarize, and standardize projects at the largest development banks, with more than 22,000 projects tracked overall. The key objective of the Early Warning System, or the EWS, is to ensure local communities and the organizations that support them have verified information about projects that are proposed by development finance institutions that may affect them, and that they are also able to respond to these projects at an early stage with clear advocacy strategies. So the Early Warning System does focus on the early response so that that can be used as leverage to prevent harm and also advocate for development that is truly community-led. The way Early Warning System functions is through a large network of partners and community contacts. So the Early Warning System team consists of international and national organizations that are constantly reviewing, verifying, and conducting outreach on projects proposed by development finance institutions. So this is the homepage of the Early Warning System. If you go to the link, you'll be able to see it. As you can see on the top right corner, there is an option for selecting language. So all the information that is displayed on the website can be translated in the language you prefer, in the language that is local to your region. The project information on Early Warning System is publicly accessible. However, to be able to search through the database, you need to have a subscription. The only reason that we have the subscription is so that we can bet that this information is accessible to CSOs, communities, researchers, and activists, and not to companies and often even bank representatives. But the subscription is free, and all you have to do is just send us an email and we can subscribe you to the database. So as of now, we are monitoring 17 development finance institutions, 15 of which you can see on the screen, the logos of these institutions. We do also plan on increasing the number of institutions we are tracking each year, which is again based on the interest expressed by our partners and the capacity of the team. Jennifer gave a very brilliant introduction to what these DFIs are and why we should hold them accountable, because they are being funded using public money and the taxes we pay. So that does give us more leverage. These multilateral development banks consist of various member countries or government representatives. And in that, there are some countries which have a higher voting share. So those are also governments that we can, lobby with. But these development finance institutions also have a few other leverages that we can make use of. So, for example, most of the larger international multilateral development banks have these minimum environment and social standards that need to be carried out by the borrowers when they take a loan, along with compliance of other national laws and international human rights standards. Their own standards are called safeguards, and they're meant to ensure that these projects don't cause any harm. But in reality, these safeguards are not implemented properly. However, if communities and civil society organizations can prove that these safeguards have been violated, then that can put pressure on the banks to call off these projects as well. So they do need to ensure that whoever they're giving their funds to also comply with these safeguard policies. So that becomes a way of putting pressure on government agencies and private companies who are borrowing from them. Many DFIs also have what are called independent accountability mechanisms. So these are non-judicial grievance mechanisms where if a community has been harmed by a project that they have funded, they can file a complaint. Now, when a community files a complaint, these get reviewed by these independent mechanisms, which then go through either a process of dispute resolution amongst the parties, or they conduct a compliance review to see if their policies have been violated or not. This can be a very long and time-consuming process for communities, but it has in the past proven to be an effective strategy to get redressal as well. Again, only if that action is taken at an earlier stage. So with regards to the information shared by development finance institutions, there are various barriers to be even able to access that information. Most of the information that they have is either available only online, and the information is very technical and in bank speak language. So at the early warning system, we do try to kind of fill in that gap by ensuring that this language is simplified, it's translated, and that this data just doesn't stay online. It reaches those who are most affected by a particular project. A lot of the information by different banks can be, they have their own definitions and classifications, so it can be confusing to look at them together. So we do try to standardize that information into a uniform system so that it can be easier to understand, and also so that that data can be compared. Through the early warning system, since we're able to monitor multiple banks, we're also able to see which banks are transparent and which are not, and which banks are following proper disclosure practices. So on the basis of this, we're able to do a deeper analysis on trends of development finance and also push banks to improve their disclosure practices. Another loophole that is there in development finance investments is that there has been an increasing trend of banks funding projects indirectly through private actors, financial intermediaries like national banks. And this information can be very hard to track. And this is often not disclosed. So we have been trying to also work with our partners to access different sources to make this information accessible. However, that's not our responsibility. It is the responsibility of the banks to be able to make this information accessible. So we're also constantly putting pressure on the banks to disclose information about projects funded by their financial intermediaries. Other than that, for the support that we give to campaigns, we also try to use the early warning system to do a mapping of the entire investment chain. to trace the different actors that are involved behind the project. So this is not just the financiers at the top level, but also looking at the local subsidiaries of a project or contractors that may be involved. So the early warning system functions in various steps. First step is to collect and organize the data. So the early warning system has a software which collates the latest information from the websites of different DFIs as soon as they propose a project. It standardizes the information and organizes it in the database. After this, the early warning system team verifies this information and then summarizes the descriptions in the form of a project summary or a snapshot, as we call it. These snapshots are publicly published, and based on the data that gets published, we then conduct outreach to ensure that this information reaches communities and civil society organizations. And if our partners or communities are interested in learning more about a project, we also assist in filing information requests or conducting further research on the human rights and environment rights impacts of a project. We also work with our partners to collate any relevant news, reports, research that's already been done, and other campaign information connected to the projects or the companies being funded. And we ensure that all of this information gets added to the database so that through the information collected, we can also counter the narrative that is being proposed by development finance institutions, where they will justify their project with a particular language. But when we get an understanding of the on-ground impacts, we get a more holistic perspective based on what they're saying and what the reality is. So if a community is also interested in responding to a project, we support them through various means of organizing and campaign strategy. We have often used community-led research to support communities to conduct their own research. Following that, we also support communities and local partners to amplify their demands, priorities, and concerns with specific governments, development banks, companies, and investors. And through the early warning system, we're also able to conduct trends analysis so that we can uncover the trends in the policy and practice of development finance as well. So this is an example of a snapshot that we publish. We do try to ensure that the information is as simple and less technical, and through a snapshot, you get an understanding of what you need to know. So this is a snapshot for a company based in Vietnam called Mavin. So Mavin was getting a loan from IFC to set up pig breeding facilities in Vietnam. So through this, you can see what are the locations in which these facilities are being implemented. This particular loan has already been approved on February 15, 2022, and this was an investment amount of $26.49 million. And you can also see here the risk rating. Now, this is a risk rating that is often given by the banks themselves based on the environment and social impacts that a project may cause. So A is often the highest and D is the lowest. So here they have written that it has a medium risk, but it is important to not take that information as is, because often they don't also categorize the projects properly. And with a lot of factory farming projects, we've seen that they give a low risk rating to the projects, which is often in C or D, and they try to show that it doesn't have a lot of environment harm. So the early warning system has been a part of the Stop Financing Factory campaign, factory farming campaign, or SFFF. Jennifer gave a beautiful introduction about the work that's done by the coalition to shift development finance away from industrial livestock production towards a more equitable and sustainable food system. Now the campaign looks at a large range of projects. So it's not just directly factory farming projects that like livestock, poultry, dairy, but also other industries that are associated to or supporting factory farming. Like these could be feed manufacturers, medicine, health industries, or transport projects or energy water projects that are supporting factory farming. So the role of the early warning system in the campaign is to regularly monitor and update the latest information and then publishing the snapshots, which are then shared with the campaign weekly. The campaign then will review and vet through the projects and identify which are the most harmful projects and which are the projects that are linked most closely to factory farming. Based on the projects identified, we support the campaign in the outreach of those projects to reach out to partners in different regions. And if there is a need for a community-led response and policy advocacy work, we support in those interventions. We also support the campaign in doing a larger data analysis from the data that gets collected from the early warning system as well. For example, this is some of the data of projects funded by development banks from January to August 2022. From here, we can see that there's a high number of projects that have been funded by African Development Bank, IFC, which is the private arm of the World Bank, IDB, which is a bank operating in the Latin American region. DFC is a US agency, which is quite active worldwide as well. And this is data of the countries where it was funded. If we look through it, there is definitely a lot more countries in Africa and Latin America, but we're also seeing a growing trend of more projects being proposed in Asia. As we can see in this database, there are around 7 projects that have already been proposed for India this year. I just like to talk about a very successful case of the campaign, which many of you may know about, which is the Marfrig case, which led to the dropping of a $43 million loan for a beef producer known as Marfrig Global Foods earlier this year. So this really speaks to the power of the campaign, which identified this project and put together a very strong letter, which was signed by around 200 organizations and sent to the IDB board of directors at a very early stage. And through this letter, they were able to highlight the impact of this loan on the deforestation and land grabbing in the Amazon. And they were able to clearly articulate the environment and social violations of this company, also focusing on the violations to SDGs and Paris Agreement commitments. This was followed by a very strong campaign to put pressure on the board and management. There was also an online campaign with the hashtag Divest Factory Farming. So this early response and the pressure that was generated through that created a lot of noise, and that did put pressure on the banks to investigate into these concerns. So the board of directors was supposed to vote on this particular project on December 2021, but because of the pressure generated, that got pushed to May 2022. And this year, we saw that on the IDB website, they had dropped the loan, so they were no longer going to continue funding that. While this is a case in Latin America, the campaign has also been monitoring increasing number of cases in Asia. I'll share 2 examples with you. One is a company known as Innova Feed, which is going to be funded in Indonesia and Malaysia by IFC. So this particular support was a technical advisory support for expansion of insect plants. So the campaign has been preparing to reach to the IFC to call out the environment impacts of insect production, which is also linked to factory farming. And they've also been questioning the disclosure of information of this project, which they haven't really given very specific information about where this project is located, what its impacts will be. Another company that we are working on getting more information on is Sugana Foods in India, which is known to be India's largest broiler chicken manufacturing company. Maybe some of you would have more information about this. This company has been provided 3 investments by ADB and 1 by IFC. So as of now, apparently there is a case going on against this company, which was filed by PETA India, because this company was there was a report done that showed that this company was killing unwanted male chicks or the chicks that were discarded in the factory. Other than that, there's a lot of information that they didn't share in the project. So we also filed an access to information request to get that information. It's also interesting to see how they have justified many of these projects. Here you can see that this is a COVID-19 loan, and this company has received this loan to make up for the losses they suffered in COVID-19, which is also very ironic because it has been proven that many factory farming projects are linked to zoonotic diseases as well. So it's important to keep countering the narrative put forward by these companies and raise our voices towards the harmful practices being followed by these companies as well. That's all from me. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I took a little bit more time. If you wish to receive information on any of the factory farming projects in your region or support the campaign, I would motivate you to join the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign and also subscribe to the early warning system. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vaishnavi, for a very for a wonderful presentation. It's an incredible database. Yeah, Elliot has just put in the chat as well. So yeah, we'll share the questions later on during our Q&A. So now I'd like to call in our third and final speaker for this session. Witch, over to you.
Thank you so much, Angel. I am going to share my screen, which I cannot do yet. So thank you so much, Angel, for the introduction, and thank you, Vaishnavi, for a very amazing presentation about early warning system. I think I'm gonna have to go and sign up at the subscribe on the website. For now, I would like to ask a favor because I cannot share screen. So can someone help me, please? Okay, now there you go. It works now. Thank you so much. All right. So can someone confirm if they can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right. And so good afternoon or good morning, according to where you're from again. So my name is Witch. I feel very honored to have an opportunity to speak here. So I would like to start by a very short description that I have just become involved with Banks for Animals project, the one that I'm going to be speaking like only very recently. So Morel, my coworker who kickstarted this project, will join me for the Q&A. So a little bit about our project called Banks for Animal. So by we I mean Sunaki Animal, we launched this program in 2021. I'm going to show you the website soon. But this project focuses on commercial banks and not development banks like the one that Vaishnavi and Jenny. So this is what we actually did. We did research and analyzed commercial banks' policies in loans and see whether they have clear policies regarding loans for businesses that subject animals to worse practice or extreme sufferings or not. So here's how it looks like. We actually went to commercial banks' website, score for their PDF, for the PDF documents that talks about their policies in giving loans, and we studied it, and then we analyze and give banks the points and rank them. So we developed criteria that cover animal welfare in various industries: food production, animals used for testing, and animals that are used in entertainment or fashion, not just so it covers more than just animals that are used in food production. So we have the documents that detail banks' policies, and then we study them, we analyze the policies, right? And then we rate each criteria based on whether the bank complies, whether each bank complies to the criteria that we set or not. So later, I will show you the website and we will navigate the website together, but you will see the details. So starting with the green one from the bottom here. So green one with a check mark means that the bank complies to this criteria, meaning that they they have the policy that address this issue. So the orange, anything in it means that the bank complies, but only partially and not sufficient. Therefore, they don't get the green with the check mark. And then the last symbol is this one, the red circle with the cross in the middle, means that to this particular criteria at all, and it doesn't state on there on the whatever. So then we have these criteria. We give these, like, we rate each one according to, like, using these three symbols, and then we rank these banks in order, and then we divide into three categories: the global banks, the banks in Asia, and banks in Latin America. The one we are the banks in Asia. So our rationale. So why are we like reaching out to commercial banks? Why are we looking at policies? Commercial banks, right? So actually, when we analyze the key players in factory farming industry, and if we follow the money, we will often end up at some commercial banks. Commercial banks are the institutions that invest money in businesses in factory farmings and profit from it. So commercial banks finance companies that we are campaigning and asking for better policies. Therefore, these commercial banks can play a very important role to shift the entire sector. So if they adopt stronger animal welfare policies and engage with their clients, meaning the one who asks for loans from them, commercial banks can influence the industry to adopt better animal welfare standards. But it is not so easy to get commercial banks to adopt a new policy that restricts its practice, because, I mean, commercial banks are not funded by public money, right? It's private money, and then their main goal is to make profits. So we cannot use the same argument that we use with development bank when we talk to commercial banks. So this is why we think that it is crucial to increase public pressure on these commercial banks. And one way to increase the public pressure is to rank them publicly on our website and make it very easy for people to access and, like, see the information. So on our website, we have this ranking list. So I am going to show you the website, and it might take some seconds because I have to switch. So 1 second. And please let me know if you can't hear me. Just started like 3 seconds ago. It just started raining here. And it's very distracting for me. I sometimes, like, I feel like I can't hear, but yeah, I hope you can still hear me. All right. Okay, could you please let me know if you see our website?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Yes, great. Thank you. So here's our website, banksforanimals.org. So if you have not visited them yet or have never seen it, I would like to invite you to find a time to check. So let's go to see the ranking list. I would like to show you the criteria first because I kept talking about the criteria, but I did not talk about what they are. So here are the criteria that we developed. It covers different sectors like animal farming and food production, animal testing, entertainment and fashion, and also governance. So this one, so we rate whether the bank has policies to support businesses that are more sustainable or better for animal welfare or not. So like the above criteria, like here we see whether they have the policies to move away from the cruelest practice or not. But this one, we would like to see whether they have any statement to support the transition to the system or to the business that are better or not. So we can expand and see some of the criteria here. So for example, cage. So this one, we will look at the bank's policy and see whether it prohibits finance to companies that use cages or extreme confinement or not. Or so we also have ones about transportation. So we see whether it prohibits long transport of animals or not. We also have one criteria about antibiotic use because this is a huge issue. So with animal testing, we would like to see whether the bank has any policy that prohibits animal testing for cosmetics or not. So here are some examples. You can click expand and see our explanation on each one here. So and our criteria, you can read about our criteria here. So to find out more how we develop this criteria. So let's go back to the ranking list because I think this is a cool part of our website, and this is the part that will help increase public pressure against commercial banks. So as I mentioned earlier, we divided banks into 3 categories, right? Global, Asian. So let's click some and see how it looks like. This is DBS, banks from Singapore. So this here you will see the criteria that I mentioned earlier and see what is our rating for each criteria of these banks. So for DBS, you will see that for 5 freedom and cages, DBS complies, but only partially because it has an orange circle. Click expand. We actually put like the verbatim policy from the bank's website or document, like we put here, and then we explain why we only gave the orange circle and not the green checkbox. And then there are some criteria where not complied at all, and then we will see the red circle here. Let's see, if I'm not mistaken, DBS has 1 green check marks. So it's about transition finance. So DBS a policy to support a sustainable, to give loans to business that are more sustainable or more animal friendly, and therefore they get the green check marks here. So this one will if this one more of the green check marks, they will be in the higher ranking. So when we compile the list of the banks, right? We give them points according to the criteria, and then we rank them. We put add up all the scores and order and put them on our website. So if we go back, DBS has 7 out of total of 74 points. And yeah, if we see, we can see here which bank is the highest and which is the lowest and receive 0 point. And we believe that by publicly ranking commercial banks like this, we hope to create more transparency, and we would like to provide a platform for people to check and question their banks about its lack of policies. So ultimately, what we want is that we hope people will think more about animal welfare practicing the banks that they use. Like I feel like these days people will have their will have their money in the bank. So we hope that people would look more and question their own banks more to see where their own money goes to. So if you are interested to know more about this project or to learn about your bank's policies, you are invited to come to this website. It's quite comprehensive. I think it covers a lot of banks, and then you can see whether your bank has policies that address some animal welfare issues or not. So coming back to the question, right? Like coming back to the question that is our topic today, do Asian banks protect animal welfare? So it's quite the list that we have here, comparing side by side, that not enough. Seeing the ranking list here, we can see that they are not prioritizing animal welfare as they should. The one in the highest ranking is DBS, and they only have 7 points, which is not even a half of 42 points. So what we think is that maybe the people in Asia are still not, like, maybe it's a lack of awareness. Maybe if we keep pushing this website and educating people to know more about like how commercial banks operate, banks actually give loans to industries that they might not their own money to go to, people would start questioning their banks more, and we hope that these rankings will go up in the future. I mean, the points, the scores for Asian banks, we hope that it will go up in the future. So I am gonna switch back again. So there might be some hassle. All right, so we're back. So the question is, what's next, right? What can we do? What are some of the steps that we can take, knowing all about this? So we have a very comprehensive list of banks from on our website in many countries. So we would like to invite you to visit our website, check if your bank is listed on there or not, and check if they have policies or not. So if your bank is listed on the website already, on a website there's an option to, like, you can click, we have provide a template, you can copy, adapt a message a little bit, and use that message to send an email to your bank. But if your bank is not listed here, you can still write a message to them. These commercial banks, like, they will have to provide the ways to communicate for their clients to communicate on their websites, right? So you can check your bank's website and use the email address or the contact form they provide on their websites to write to them and policies regarding animal welfare. So the more banks hear from people, the more likely that this issue will be brought up to the decision makers of the banks, and the more they will issue these policies in the future. I would like to thank you so much for your attention, and thank you for bearing with me with the switching back and forth between windows. I hope it did not take too much time. So thank you so much. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Witch, Vaishnavi and Jenny, for your presentations. Now we move on to the question and answers. To start it off, I'd like to direct the first question that we received to Jenny. So we have a question from Ella Wong, and the question is, how are the points of persuasion to MDBs different compared with lobbying private banks against factory farming?
Perfect. Really good question. So the development banks have different decision-making structures, and in general, they're less, when you're talking to private financial institutions, their primary interest is essentially profit. And if there are arguments that you can make that are sort of like economic arguments, that's one of the most important things that they will listen to you for. For the development bank staff themselves have power over a lot of the kind of technical guidance, like the specific animal welfare criteria that projects have to meet. But for bigger, more strategic decisions, like should we stop funding fossil fuels altogether? Should we stop funding intensive livestock together? Those decisions are actually made by the shareholders, the governments. So there you have to be thinking about what interests the governments and what kind of arguments you can use that might persuade them. And that varies, of course, depending on which government you're talking to. There are some governments who have very strong, climate pledges and climate action. So they might be interested in arguments like that. There are other governments that might be really worried about human health or other things like that. So it's, for the development banks, you have to look a bit more at the kind of government policy side of things and see what can be of interest there, rather than like purely looking at maybe the economic side of things as well. At least that's been our experience so far.
Thanks so much for that, Jenny. I think I'll also ask the second question, which is quite related. So around campaigning. So essentially, we find out about the investing plan of development banks when projects have already been submitted or they're nearing the decision time. Is it possible for us to, or how could we gain more time to campaign, or how can we anticipate that earlier? I think this is also a question that potentially Vaishnavi can input into that. Over to you, Jenny.
Yeah, so certainly one of the biggest problems is that, for instance, the IFC categorizes projects as category A, which are kind of like projects that they anticipate will have big impacts. And then there are projects that are category B, which are sort of like, in their view, less potentially impactful projects. And industrial livestock projects at the moment are almost always classified as category B, which means that we only have about half as much time, I think, before they get voted on compared to a category A project. So one of the biggest things that we're pushing for at the moment is for the development banks to actually recognize that industrial livestock projects, can have significant impacts and should go through a more rigorous due diligence process, and they should be, categorized as this kind of category A type project. And that would be one of the first steps that we could have towards actually having enough time to assess whether there are going to be harms caused by that project, and to also, connect with local communities, make sure that they are given the information that they need with enough time to actually respond to it as well. So that's kind of one of the first steps that we would want to see.
Thanks for that, Jenny. Vaishnavi, just checking if you'd like to add to that response.
Definitely. Can I also add a little bit to the first question? Yeah, I think it was also really interesting in terms of what which I had shared about, them pushing private banks to also have policies similar to what MDBs have. So we know that MDBs have environment and social safeguards, which can be used for leverage, but it is important also for us to use those same strategies to ensure that more banks come up with these policies. And I think it's really great that there are groups that are doing that and raising pressure, because of which many banks are now coming out with those policies and standards as well. So I do think a similar approach needs to be taken even with commercial banks. With regards to the early response, I think that is really a big part of the focus of our campaign. So when we are monitoring the projects, our initial focus is to just look at the projects that have been recently disclosed and to ensure that the campaign is prepared to respond initially and not give as much priority to projects that have already been approved. So that kind of works in our own categorization of the priority that we give to projects. And we hope that that information can be shared with partners. What is very useful about the Stop Factory Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign is that this information and resources have been collectivized by the campaign. So the campaign has already identified the partners in different regions. That it has identified the roles of different groups, so they're able to complement each other's roles. So I really think that that is also where the early response becomes possible, because of the fact that there is this collective effort that is working towards immediately identifying and immediately responding and immediately reaching out to communities as well.
Yeah, that's a very important point that you've raised, Vaishnavi. And again, we'd like to reinforce the invitation to everyone listening and participating in this conversation that the Stop Financing Factory Farming Coalition and campaign is actually looking to expand its membership and supporters. And that will definitely help in terms of furthering our impact. There is a question for you, which around since publishing the report, the Banks for Animals report, what changes have you seen from commercial banks you've analyzed? And are there encouraging actions that you've actually monitored?
For this one, I would like to invite Morel to help me. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you for the question. We've only launched this data late last year, and we haven't seen a huge number of changes yet. We have seen some smaller changes. For example, BNP Paribas, French bank, has improved its animal welfare policy since we launched this data. But we are currently in the process of updating the policy assessment. So early next year, we'll be launching that, and then we'll have a clearer picture of how much banks have actually improved their policies. But we have had some encouraging talks with banks. We acknowledge that this takes some time for banks to adopt the policy. They don't do that overnight. And we've had several very encouraging calls with banks that are concerned about the issue and like to learn more. So we're hopeful that we will see some changes in the future.
Great, thanks for that further information. Just reading through the questions, we still have quite a few here. There's one here, Vaishnavi, for you. Is there interest from other advocacy groups other than factory farming, such as environmental conservation or social? So I think perhaps this is in the EWS and the wider offering of the system.
Definitely, our membership and partners work over a range of issues, and then the work of the early warning system then becomes of also collating that. So, when we're working with animal welfare groups, we also connect them with groups in our network who are working on indigenous rights, groups in our network who are working on environment protection. So that also becomes the role of the early warning system to bring together partners to work together. And these partners are connected to multiple issues. The other advantage of the early warning system is that the investments itself are varied. There are different kinds of investments from health to fossil fuel. So we do try to do our outreach according to the projects identified as well. So it depends from region to region, and also the partners who work with us and subscribe to the database.
Great. Okay, since we're running out of time, I'll just read out. We have room for 2 more questions that that can be addressed to all of you. So the first one is, in the next month, all roads will lead towards COP27. And we, of course, expect climate finance to be once again discussed. And given the remaining shortfall in commitments, all eyes are on that aspect. So what pledges or actions do you want to see out of that global moment? Yeah, so that's a question. What pledges or actions do you want to see out of that global moment? Jenny, you want to go first?
Sure. So one very interesting thing that's going on within the development banks at the moment is they're developing a methodology to assess which kind of projects are aligned with the Paris Agreement or not. And it's at the moment a very problematic methodology that's still considering a lot of factory farming projects and other projects to be Paris aligned, when civil society would, I think, disagree. So I'd really like to see that as a moment for us to really help put pressure on the MDBs, and more importantly, for actually governments as shareholders of the MDBs to be putting pressure on the MDBs themselves to be actually reaching higher. I think that we've reached the point now where, livestock has to now be on the agenda at COP and beyond. Like, we're moving into the point where we know that we can't meet emissions targets unless we start addressing this. So I hope that maybe this will be the year for that.
Thanks, Jenny. Vaishnavi, Witch, Merrill, any further additions?
Yeah, I think we really need to reinforce our voices towards the harms and damages to climate justice that have already been done, right? Like, every year there are very vague climate commitments and newer false climate solutions that are being proposed. And I think it's also really important to recognize the, corporate neoliberal bourgeoisie elites who are, making the decisions here. So it's important to counter these false climate solutions that are being proposed within the space, but it's also important for us to have strong advocacy outside of these spaces to push for investments that are supporting community-led development, and also ensure that, in this new trend of disinvestment that is happening, that just doesn't lead to projects being pushed from global north to global south, which is what we're seeing with a lot of projects with, waste to energy projects, petrochemical, industrial, livestock. There's a shift from north to south happening. So they're like, oh, we are taking the responsibility for it, but we're seeing a rise in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So it's really important for us to be able to also call out this trend and work actively towards stopping it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Vaishnavi. That was an amazing answer. I have very small thing to add though, because both Vaishnavi and Jenny already answered a lot already. But yeah, we would love to see commitments from development banks to not finance factory farming anymore. And we hope that, because if development banks have such a commitment, right, we really hope that this kind of commitment will inspire commercial banks in countries to follow the examples. So yeah, if like if the development banks can do this first, our argument when we go and meet these we see that the development banks have stopped financing factory farming already, so it only makes sense for commercial banks to like look to development and do something, issue some policies that are not so cruel to animals, or some policies that are better for the environment.
Great, thank you. One very quick closing question. So this is for everyone. Do you think there is a path towards animal cruelty-free financing? And what do you think is the first step? Very quick responses. Jenny, Vaishnavi, and Witch. Jenny?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is. I think otherwise we wouldn't be doing what we're doing, and we would just be incredibly sad instead. I think that the first step depends on you know, where we're talking about and what kind of institution that we're talking about. But I think, you know, fundamentally a really important first step is to have that mindset shift of at least having animal welfare considered as something that they should be thinking about when they're making these investments, because a lot of the time, even that basic step isn't there yet.
Vaishnavi?
I don't think I have any new points to add based on what the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign is already doing, right? So I think one thing that is really relevant about the campaign, that it is, you know, also stating that these alternatives already exist. You don't have to kind of create them. There are local, more sustainable and equitable food systems that were already, existing in the global South. And what these industrial monocultural systems have done is they are kind of leading to the decline of those systems, and small scale farmers and livestock producers. So it is really important to kind of ensure that we keep pushing for those alternatives that already exist and provide more support to them. And the campaign is also doing the knowledge sharing work towards understanding the interconnections between animal welfare, climate justice, environment rights, indigenous rights. So yeah, I think the campaign's already kind of on the step of doing it. And I have learned a lot from the campaign in that process as well.
Excellent, thank you. Witch?
Yes, this one I might ask Morel to add at the end as well, but I just add shortly that commercial banks need to start adopting stronger policies. And for that to happen, we really need public pressure, because we can't go speak to the banks, we can present the benefits and the risks that might come if they don't start acting something. But it is unlikely that they will start taking action unless they see that a lot of people are are more aware and start pressuring the banks that they're using. So Morel, would you like to add anything?
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, I completely agree. Maybe just one thing to add. I think it's also important that the commercial banks set up credit lines that support farmers to make the transition, because that requires additional investment. It requires changes, so they need financial support for that.
Excellent. So with that, I think we have just run a bit over in terms of our session. Thank you to our panelists once again. Thank you to all our participants, and thank you to the Asia for Animals Coalition and the organizing team that made all of this possible. A lot of people behind the scenes working with us to have this session with you. Thank you, and have a lovely day ahead of you.
Thank you.